Hello everyone, welcome to your next class. In this one we're going to talk about Anaconda and Jupyter notebooks a lot more. Anaconda and Jupyter are very useful within the data science community. I have seen Jupyter notebooks as a preferred or recommended qualification or skill for a data scientist position, so it is like very hot and accepted. And we're going to talk about why Anaconda and Jupyter are useful and can be used for many different things. I want to show you how it all works, why this stuff is important, because there are going to be many different flavors and types of this stuff for all different languages that you use. So understanding why these things are important, why they're used in the industry is going to be very valuable to you in deciding what kinds of software you want to use to make your coding life easier. So in this class, guys, you're going to understand how to use Anaconda and Jupyter notebooks. You're going to understand why Anaconda and why Jupyter, why do we need these two things put together? What makes it useful to have both of these things at the same time as opposed to just using Jupyter notebooks. Because you can essentially use Jupyter notebooks without Anaconda and just fine without any issue. So what is Anaconda? I got you guys to download this thing. Anaconda is a package manager and virtual environment builder. What that means is later on in these courses, you're going to start to see how we are going to start importing classes, libraries, and functions that don't exist in Python by default. Like, it's not a library that exists because someone has created it, or there's like some special thing that isn't something that is going to be widely used with Python. So what Anaconda can do is sometimes you'll have a package that it only works in Python 2.7, or you want to use R for something. What Anaconda does is it organizes all of these different versions of the languages that you know, as well as the packages that exist for them, and keeps it all kind of packaged and stored together. Installing both Python 2 and Python 3 and getting it to communicate without mixing things up can be very difficult. It might sometimes they'll write to things or are reading from similar libraries or packages and folders, and they shouldn't be. So Anaconda is very useful in both creating environments that say, okay, well, I want to run some code, but I want it in 2.7, or I want to run some R or some other language, and not have any of these dependency issues because I'm on like a different operating system, or I have Python already installed or something to that factor. Like I have 2.7, but I want to do 2.4. Like there's all different types of reasons why you'd want to use something like a virtual environment builder and package manager to make that easier for you. Consequently, Anaconda now works and is built in, plugs into Jupyter notebooks. So you can have your package manager talking to this thing called Jupyter, which essentially is almost like a user interface to run blocks of code that is a little easier to read and for like lay people to understand without having to show them like really hard to stare at blocky terminal stuff. So essentially what it does is it creates a user interface in your browser that you can interact with and do different things with. It doesn't actually go to a website. It just uses your browser technology to render an interface that you can interact with. Okay, so with that, guys, there's no syntax section for this chapter. We're gonna just like kind of do a guided tour of Anaconda and Jupyter notebooks. I'm gonna show you a couple of the different features that are available to make your coding life easier. You're gonna see that I used Terminal for our first couple of chapters. You can just as likely use Jupyter notebooks to do a lot of these exercises as well. So feel free to actually use this for your daily life. So the first thing we're going to do is move into Anaconda. So this is Anaconda, guys. This is what happens when you turn it on. You have your toolbar. You run your Anaconda after you've downloaded it. Come to your home section here. It says Applications, Base Root, and it has Test here. What you're looking at are you are currently in a specific virtual environment that you've designed. And these are the things that you can run on it. You can create a Jupyter notebook. You can create an RStudio virtual environment. You can create a Spyder virtual environment. There are other types of things that you can add to this or install, but these are the ones that currently exist and are available for you and I to use default out of the Anaconda package. So this is kind of like your default virtual environment. However, if you want, you can start to play with your virtual environment. So even though this is our default, what you can do is this shows all the packages that are currently loaded in and available for Anaconda, specifically for Python at the moment. So you can see all the things that are installed for Python. We can also go to the things that are not installed and start, if we know any of them that we want to use, we can start to, select them and include them, and Anaconda will now say, okay, every time I turn on, like Atom is super interesting for us. Every time I turn on a new browser with all this Python ready to go, it knows that, okay, it's good. Like, these are the packages that it should be able to load and install and use without having any kind of like dependency issues, because it's Python 2.5 and not 2.3. You can create new environments as well using this here. I don't want to spend too much time on this because it takes a little bit of time to load, and I don't want to spend like forever with having you guys load some stuff in and having it, oh, okay, it loaded up pretty fast. So you can create your own environment and customize it as you see fit. I just kind of duplicated an environment in this case, or created one and just made a test one. You can add and remove the different virtual environment features as you want them. So we're going to leave base root there, and what we're going to do is, you'll see the test environment didn't have Jupyter Notebooks installed. So we're going to make sure that we go back to our base root directory, which will take a second to render, and here we go. So now let's say we want to create a Jupyter Notebook from scratch. How do we do that? We just click launch here. My terminal is going to turn on a little bit, and then it's going to render, it's going to like load up my Google Chrome and throw me into this thing here. So the first thing that you see is, I'm going to delete this just because we don't need it, is that we have something called localhost and this thing here, and then /tree. All this is saying is we are not on the internet right now. We are rendering this locally. It's on this thing called a port. Don't need to worry too much about that. And then if you go to this port /tree, it's going to show all the information for a Jupyter Notebook. In previous lectures, we have created a script called, well, maybe we haven't done it yet. So first, what we might want to do is we have our file tree here. This is kind of where we ended up. And when you have a home directory, this is your default directory when you start Jupyter. If we want to create a directory that maybe we're going to do some Python data science stuff on, let's navigate into something and create a folder or create a file that we can then play with. So I'm going to go into our desktop here, and it's going to render all this. So we're now in our desktop file folder, and if we want, we can create a new folder. Like, it could be anything. It's untitled at the moment. If we go back to it, we can click this thing and rename it, or delete it, or remove it. That's how this is the user interface to like find a Jupyter Notebook to do coding on. If you don't have a folder, I suggest you make a folder called Udemy Python scripts, or Udemy data science, whatever you want, but do make a folder dedicated to this class. Okay, guys, I made mine called Udemy _Python _scripts. When we go into here, we see all these things called .ipynb. Unfortunately, I have a really bad habit of not labeling files sometimes. So these, when you create a new Jupyter Notebook, it first gets labeled as untitled, and I just always forget to title them. But these were a bunch of demos that I made anyways. So at the moment, you see something called random forest. This .ipynb means this is actually a Jupyter Notebook that we can look at. I'll load that one up, and then we will also look at creating our own at the same time as well. So let's see what this one looks like at the moment. You'll see that we have like blocks of code. It's all highlighted. This is what your end product block for a Jupyter Notebook might look like, with some advanced code that you might not be able to read at the moment. However, let's just start creating a notebook from scratch. You might not have Python 2 stuff installed, but you should have Python 3 because you downloaded this with the Python 3 dependencies. If you want to create a new Jupyter Notebook, you just go to New and click that Python 3 there. And what it's going to do is it's going to create a new file, untitled 8. First thing we want to do is let's rename this Jupyter Notebook. So how you rename this file is you go right up there and say, my first notebook. And that's what it'll label it as. And you'll see here that we have kind of like a file edit, something that looks a little bit like a Word document or something to that effect. And then we have this thing called in here. You'll notice that this is almost like a text file where we can script and write some stuff in there. And rather than having, your normal Python 3 chevrons, where you then put in information, you can include blocks of code that will then that Jupyter will then try and run from this block. Okay, so if I just print hello world, and you'll learn how to do this soon. This is some Python code, and what happens underneath the block after I run that command, I'll tell you what I did there, is it prints the output of this this Python code I wrote. How I did that was I used a hotkey. I pressed and held the control button and then pressed enter. And you'll know that it worked because it says in and it has this thing too. And that's like saying, okay, well, it successfully took in this code twice so far. 3 times so far. If something was broken, I'm gonna break this code a little bit. You'll see that you have an error there. If it's taking a lot of time running, like it's running but it hasn't finished running, it'll have an asterisk there. Another nice useful thing about Jupyter Notebooks is that you can create multiple blocks. So if we go into this insert cell and go insert cell below, we can have 2 separate things that run different protocols. And this is useful because a lot of times when we create code in blocks, like sections at a time. And now you'll see that we can you can build something and write to a certain point, and then kind of almost have like a paragraph change, or like a change the page to something else to help break up the code and have it be easier to for other people to read and recognize and run one at a time. If your code is running for a long time and it's like hanging on that asterisk thing and it's not working, you might have some error, you might have some processing that's going on. In order to break that running, you want it to stop and start over. You can try using restart or interrupt, and going through that process, you'll see some prompts and just say, yeah, restart or interrupt, and then it'll try to break out of whatever it was trying to run in your Jupyter Notebook. Now, there's a couple of other things you can look at here, for instance, like cutting and copying cells and a bunch of other shortcuts. But I think that for the most part, you can like make copies. If you want to save, it usually saves automatically for you, but you can also do the, on Mac, it's Command S, and it'll save at any point in time. For the most part, guys, that's all I really wanted to show you about Jupyter Notebooks, just like how to get here, why they're important, how you can use them, as well as some of the basic interface and how to work with it. You also see here that some of these buttons are, you can move blocks around, you can run some code by using, your mouse as opposed to using hotkeys. I just prefer hotkeys. You can also see all the different hotkey options here that you can adjust on the fly. Okay, guys, let's do a recap. So what did we learn today, guys? We learned why Anaconda and Jupyter Notebooks are useful, why they can be used to make your code like neat and easy to run, as well as well organized in your head. We learned some tips and tricks on how to make your Jupyter Notebooks run quicker with some hotkeys. And we learned concepts related around package managers and virtual environments, why these concepts are important, especially when you get to be better at code, why having a package manager will help save you from headaches, as well as learning about the idea of a virtual environment where we're kind of create a little shell with some code, like some versions of different programs that we can run specific libraries that might not work anymore in our current version or something. So thank you very much, guys, and with that, see you next time.